Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I hope the week has gone well. It's certainly getting very warm around here. Macro thoughts, just unbelievable moves in the markets. I'll go back to Hans Sader, who I follow on Twitter, and he tweeted this diagram. He says crude oil's 10% range in the last 5 hours is dwarfed by the drop in the Swiss market. Have a look at this image. He produces some fantastic visual representations of the markets, and just remind you then, I was talking about this being the year for the US being the comeback economy, China as well, and but China's slightly different. I think it's going to be a US story this year, and Europe is going to remain off balance. Home thoughts, going back to Thomas Pynchon, because they've obviously premiered his movie Inherent Vice, which is not one of his best books by a long shot. Bleeding Edge and others are much better. Gravity's Rainbow, I think. But he says, I dream that I have found us both again, with spring so many strangers' lives away, and we so free, out walking by the sea, with someone else's paper words to say. They took us at the gates of green return, too lost by then to stop, and asked them why. Do children meet again? Does any trace remain along the superhighways of July? Go to Africa tweeted, check out these amazing dolphins at the Plettenberg Hotel. What an extraordinary photograph. And that took me back to the time we did meet dolphins on the way to Wasini Island 1,110 days ago. If you've never seen that video, do have a look at it. And we went recently on December the 29th looking for dolphins with Ali, the navigator, whose photograph I took. But this time we did not see any dolphins, but we saw a turtle. Going back to Pynchon, Gravity's Rainbow, it's been a prevalent notion, fallen sparks, fragments of vessels broken at the creation, and someday, somehow, before the end, a gathering back to home, a messenger from the kingdom arriving at the last moment. But I tell you, there is no such message, no such home, only the millions of last moments, nothing more. Our history is an aggregate of last moments. Global Risks Report out of the WEF, interesting map of the most likely and impactful global risks, puts forward that 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, interstate conflict is once again a foremost concern. However, according to them, 2015 differs markedly from the past, with rising technological risks, notably cyber attacks, and new economic realities which remind us that geopolitical tensions present themselves in a very different world from before. And I think that's the market is the economics now are much more interlinked with the geopolitics, and that's a very interesting time. I like these sorts of moments in the market, big moves, for sure. Information flows instantly around the globe, and emerging technologies have boosted the influence of new players and new types of warfare. At the same time, past warnings of potential environmental catastrophes have begun to be borne out, yet insufficient progress has been made. Multiple cross-cutting challenges can threaten social stability, perceived to be the issue most interconnected with other risks in 2015, and additionally aggravated by the legacy of the global economic crisis in the form of strained public finances and persistent unemployment. The central theme of profound social instability highlights an important paradox that has been smouldering since the crisis, but surfaces prominently in this year's report, saying the world is insufficiently prepared for an increasingly complex risk environment. And then talking about the interplay between geopolitics and economics. Interconnections between geopolitics and economics are intensifying, because states are making greater use of economic tools in a coercive manner, in the case of the US, very sophisticated coercive manner, from regional integration and trade treaties to protectionist policies and cross-border investments, to establish relative geopolitical power. This threatens to undermine the logic of global economic cooperation and potentially the entire international rule-based system. Interesting points. Now, this morning I learned there was a terror raid in Belgium, and suspects opened fire on police before being neutralized. This was the reporters received. And I wrote on August 25, when I was talking more about the media direction of ISIS and IS, all points west. It's speaking in English in many cases, and it's appealing to people in the West. And I said, what is so fascinating is that their media efforts all point west, and that the richest hunting ground for these new 21st century serial killers or terrorists is among the disaffected in the Western world. Belgium confirms that, as did Paris. The Pope said of Charlie Hebdo, there are limits to freedom of expression when religion is insulted. And he says, if you swear at my mother, expect a punch. I like this, that was tweeted by Joseph Willits, a Lebanese response to the new Charlie Hebdo cover, with some assistance from Mia Khalifa. It's rather good, I think, a little bit cheeky as well. John Kerry says he may meet Iran's Zarif again this week. People whose opinion I trust tell me this is now much closer, and that last time, John Kerry was very, very upset because apparently, the person I'm speaking to should know, Susan Rice apparently kiboshed it last time round, and he's saying, look, it's a done deal. On the 28th of October 2013, I wrote about Barack Obama and Hassan Rouhani. And I said then the recent rapprochement, which is now continued, as you can see, into 2015, between Barack Obama and Iran's Hassan Rouhani has certainly snapped a losing sequence in US-Iranian relations that goes back all the way to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. When Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. The Shah was the second and the last monarch of the House of Pahlavi, otherwise known as the Peacock Throne. Hussein, and I was making a play on Barack Hussein Obama, and Hassan Rouhani share the same name as did Prophet Muhammad's revered grandsons, particularly revered in Shia Islam, of which Iran is the most prominent country. Those who pursue the study of anthroponymy, which is personal names I learned, especially in the Islamic world, probably view this as very fortuitous. Hussein and Hassan are going to have to cut through a great deal of interference, and in this situation there are powerful vested interests fully invested in the status quo. But it seems that there's been progress. Weiwei retweeted me because that what's in a name was something that I found in the Hirshhorn 802 days ago when I was wandering around there. And it was an installation by Weiwei, and it read, a name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world. A name is the most basic characteristic of our human rights. No matter how poor or how rich, all living people have a name, and it is endowed with good wishes, the expected blessings of kindness and virtue. Zbigniew Brzezinski gave an interesting interview which I had not seen to CSIS on Russia and Ukraine back in December last year. He, of course, and he's worth listening to because he makes some interesting points, and I think signals to us that the US will remain very hard-nosed for now. Zbigniew Brzezinski was the architect of the Russian defeat in Afghanistan, and famously said this: the three grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion, maintain security dependence among the vassals, keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together. Saudi Arabia, on that note of barbarians, beheaded a Burmese woman for killing her stepdaughter. Her last words, "I did not kill, I did not kill." And then I like this photograph from Mexico. A child holds hands with demonstrators while standing in front of federal policemen during a protest against the visit of Mexico's President Enrique Pena Nieto. International markets, well, it was all about the Swiss franc, and I was speaking yesterday on the rooftop at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. I said, I've just never seen anything like it. It was a plus 30% move. Among the largest ever moves in the foreign exchange markets, 41% surge after the central bank unexpectedly lifted its cap against the euro, is one of the biggest moves among major currencies since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. And unlike previous foreign exchange upheavals, yesterday's action occurred in one of the most traded currencies that is considered a haven in tumultuous times, and few saw the move coming. It's normal for the ruble to do this kind of thing, but we're talking about the Swiss francs in Axel there. That's quite extraordinary and unheard of. The biggest moves we've seen in the market, the Mexico tequila crisis, the Thai baht crisis of 97, the yen move in October 98, Turkish lira to 1 peso 2002, Russian ruble 2014, but this really ranks as one of the top. And again, going back to Hunsader, he tweeted another image, Swiss bank triggers worldwide flash crash, and crude oil ramp chart. Have a look at it again and you'll see what I mean. The Economist tweeted a daily chart. There are signs that the global economy is weakening and fear is taking hold, and what we're seeing in Switzerland is a signal of that, really. And I remember on the 25th of August writing, in fact, my view is the new normal is a very arrhythmic world. And when I plugged arrhythmia into my computer, it threw this up. For years, he'd been studying the phenomenon of chaos, of which an arrhythmic heartbeat was a perfect example. And in my view, the Swissy move yesterday is surely an arrhythmic one. Swiss National Bank unexpectedly gave up the cap. It was a surprise move, and the decision came just 1 week before the European Central Bank policymakers meet to discuss the purchase of government bonds, a move that may add pressure on the franc against the euro. The central bank has already spent billions defending the cap after introducing it in September 2011. Basically, somebody's saying the Swiss National Bank doesn't see any future anymore for their floor with the strong US dollar and the QE ahead of the ECB. They cut interest rates to minus 0.75%, and the entire yield curve in Switzerland down to 8 years is now negative. Just think about that. So, Thomas J. Jordan, who I actually met 865 days ago in Zurich, and he's the central bank governor. I'll put up a photograph I took of him before I actually went up to speak to him. He's really in the hot seat. I'll put up a 3-day chart of the dollar Swiss, and it's just plain extraordinary. The franc jumped by almost 30% in a chaotic few minutes and saw it break past parity against the euro to trade as high as 0.8052 francs per euro as it cast off the 120 per euro cap it had had in place since late 2011. This is extremely violent, totally unexpected. The central bank didn't prepare the market for it. It's sparking panic across all asset classes. The Swiss stock market, of course, crashed, and you can imagine, because just on the translation for Swiss companies, which are very forward and outward-looking companies, you'll find. The franc appreciated as much as 41% to 85.17 centimes per euro following the announcement. Market reaction has been seismic, said George Buckley, an economist at Deutsche Bank. To complement the lower deposit rate, the S&P also moved the target range for the 3-month LIBOR to between minus 1.25% and minus 0.25%. Since introducing its minimum exchange rate in September 2011, S&P's foreign currency holdings have soared. They stood at $556 billion equivalent in December, but it's exposed the Swiss to enormous fluctuations, and I think, it doesn't make sense to be long the euro. So what that tells me is this: one, was a signal to sell the euro; two, that they were one of the only buyers of the euro, actually. And now that they're not there, what happens next? Euro Swiss, I'll put up a 3-day chart. So essentially, I'm very bearish for the euro. Eric Scott Hansader, again, was the Swiss announcement leaked? Correct early bets in non-Swiss currencies are clear as a bell, he says. Interesting, and have a look at what he's putting out. Somebody saying this was a 180-degree about turn by the SNB. People feel hurt and betrayed. The interbank market for francs was liquid for hours after the event, and no traders with an open franc position were able to close it for a significant period of time at any broker. So you can see, euro, when I checked last, was 116.32, dollar index 92.25, dollar yen, which is a safe haven currency, 116.34. Swissy 0.8688, and you remember we were above 1.0 something before not too long ago. Pound 151.82, but that's popped higher during the day. Aussie 0.8233, rupee with a cut rate 62.095, South Korean won 1077.05, Egyptian pound 715, the South African rand 1154.62. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart, still targeting 100. Still of the view that we're going to get a rate hike sooner rather than later, although the market has pushed the rate hike in 2015 to 1 rate hike, and in the fourth quarter, interestingly enough. Euro dollar 116.32, but as I go back to the comments I made about the Swiss franc, it's a sell. And I think the euro dollar exchange rate is headed to parity and even lower in 2015. I know Goldman Sachs are talking about 2016, but I think it could unravel a lot more quickly. And then another diagram from Hansader, the SMI, the Swiss market index, had 2 holes and one for more than 7 minutes, he said, and I'll put his image up there. Crude oil all over the place yesterday. I wanted to sell it when it popped its head over 51, but forgot my password. Crude oil, $47.20, but I think it's a little bit higher. But just look at the price range. I'll put up a 5-day chart and then a 6-month chart. Barack Obama has turned out to be a phenomenal oil warfare specialist, hasn't he? Although he's not getting credit for it, but he deserves it. Oil has slumped more than 50% since June, pinching exports from Venezuela, who's been in China, Qatar looking for money, Nigeria, Russia. Copper has plummeted about 11% since December. They're talking about it hurting Peru and Chile, but also Zambia. The dollar has rallied 7% in the past 3 months through yesterday. Ruble down 37%. Colombian peso down 14%. Gold 1259.105. Of course, all this uncertainty, people are popping into gold. Interesting, I didn't know this because I haven't been following, but Venezuela's $4 billion of dollar bonds due 2027 have sunk to 37.1 cents on the dollar from as high as 89 cents in July. Coming to Africa, Filipe Nyusi was sworn in as Mozambique's president as the opposition continues its protests. He pledged to prioritize peace as a precondition of economic development. He was the former defense minister. Nyusi was inaugurated at a ceremony in central Maputo, succeeds Gwebeza, who stepped down after serving the maximum two 5-year terms in office. I'll put up 2 twit pics I found of the inauguration, both from Maputo that when I looked it up yesterday, and both giving an interesting flavour of what it might have looked like. Fabulous city, Maputo, by the way. Wonderful seafood, fantastic people. It's just absolutely gorgeous. I love it, actually. And I'll put up a photograph I took one day at the sunrise from my hotel when I stayed in the Polana. South African all share is down 2.46% year to date, but popped just under 1% higher yesterday. Dollar rand 11.58, but I think we're going to 12. Egyptian pound official rate 7.15. Egyptian stock market doesn't it love CC, up 7.09% this year already. And if you just overlay the time he came into power in the stock market, it soared. The best trade was just to buy it. Nigeria remains in the eye of the storm. My target for the Naira was 200, it's now 220. I can hear the echo of folks asking what went wrong, especially it's practically Shakespearean, isn't it? Last year the economy was calculated to have surpassed South Africa's, it was rebased, but the big game changer for Nigeria has been the free fall in the price of crude oil. The Nigerian oil share managed to eke out its first gain of the year, 0.25%, remains at 24-month lows and down 16.87% year to date. And I spoke about this on the 10th of November when I said that Naira and the oil share had been wackadoogooed by the price of oil. I still think the currency heads over 200. The Ghana Stock Exchange is minus 1.44% year to date. Here in Kenya, interesting news, Equity Group Holdings released an announcement and a cautionary statement talking about the proposed purchase by Norfin Invest of the shares held by Helios in Equity Group. The total number of shares that Norinvest are buying is 452,581,275, which is 12.223% of Equity Bank. Equity Bank is up 2% year to date. Had a strong year last year on expectations of the mobile money product that they are yet to roll out properly. Everready reported full year profit after tax, actually a full year profit after loss after tax of 248 million. Revenue was down quite sharply to 1.2165 billion from 1.428 billion. But essentially the loss was the closure of the factory cost, which was 246.342 million. They're saying they've deliberately decided to reposition the business in Tanzania, which led to reduced sales there. They talk of the extraordinary one-off cost. And essentially what they're doing is they've closed their factory in Nakuru. They're going to do a real estate development with that land. The company is valued at less than $10 million. And I think for sure they're going to release more than $10 million in that real estate trade in Nakuru. Kenya has signed a 25 billion shilling deal with Japan for the expansion of the Mombasa port. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph of Fort Jesus in Mombasa. I spoke yesterday at a Kenya Association of Manufacturers event, sundown event, and I thanked them for the invite. And Phyllis pushed out this infographic about Kenya industry. It makes interesting reading. It shows it's not that big. It's a very small component of the economy. In many ways, it should be much bigger. Kenya shilling 91.352. Nairobi all share plus 1.58% this year, 1.2355% below a record high from the 9th of last month. Mumia Sugar, best performing share of the stock market, up 55.26% this year. Kenya Airways has bounced 8.62% so far this year. Uchumi up 14.893% over the past 4 weeks. Strong rally post the rights issue. I was down at the coast, and one of the hotels near where I was staying was an old hotel owned by Kenneth Matiba, who was a cabinet minister, head of Kenya Brewers once. One of the old hotels that I remember. The pristine grounds of the hotel were auctioned in 2013. Nothing's happening. There are no plans to do anything. Tourism at the coast is in bad shape. Many hotels have closed and several have been put up for sale. And I wrote about this at the end of the year when I was staying at Swahili Beach, which is a lovely property. And I said, we live in a 24-hour world, and I've yet to come across the plan that bends the perception curve around tourism and around security. And I was quite negative there. And I said, we've not reached a fire sale moment for the coast, but directionally it's heading towards a denouement. And for those of us who have a longer term and more institutional memory in these respects, we know what that fire sale can look like. We remember the 1990s. And finally, I'll leave you with the image of Swahili Beach at sort of early morning when the sun was rising, and I was standing by the pool. Once again, thank you for stopping by.